Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back. I have more of your own scary stories to read to you today, so let's get into it. But before we get into it, as always, if you have any stories that you would like for me to read, please send them to the email in the description and just put YouTube in the subject line or somewhere at the beginning. But let's get into it. I've struggled with my mental health since I was a preteen. Depression and self-harming thoughts mostly, but I have been seeing therapists for years to help. Around 8 to 9 years ago, I was dealing with a neglectful relationship, which later turned into a short-term stalking situation, but I won't get into that. Coupled with the toxic housemate fallout and seeing a therapist at the same time quite regularly. This therapist uses both traditional psychology techniques as well as some other less-known practices. Her favorite process is to help you through a guided meditation, essentially leading you into a sort of hypnotic state of mind where she will have you conversate with a different version of you. And this is to help you heal. We would speak to my higher self, essentially the me that is the best version of me, and my younger self, usually around 6 to 8 the most often. Well, on this particular day, she had me lie down on the couch in the cozy upstairs office. Warm tree-filtered light was illuminating the room through the window. I can't remember if it was spring or fall, but it was pleasant weather. I was comfortable and cozy and easily followed through the steps to get into the correct mental state. Usually I would go to a place in nature in my mind, the woods and rivers and the mountains where I grew up being the most common. This time, for whatever reason, I couldn't find my way there or to any nature. It was just blackness. When we failed to get me to a place of peaceful reflection, she moved on and asked me to invite in my higher self. My higher self did not come. She asked me to ask in my younger self since my higher self seemed blocked from entering. It took a lot of effort, but my younger self finally arrived, except it wasn't my younger self. Whatever she was too perfect. A little uncanny valley. Her wavy hair had no frizz, her skin lacked the prominent freckles I had at that age, her eyes were too clear, too blue compared to the blue hazel speckled eyes that I have, and her smile, dear God, that smile, it was haunting, predatory. After my session ended, my therapist would tell me at the exact moment when not me entered, the room went dark and cold. I had my eyes closed so I didn't notice it at the time. I was apparently slightly shaking, but was verbalizing exactly what I was looking at quite clearly. My therapist prompted me to ask her why she was there. I asked, and Not Me replied with an unsettling grin, to watch you burn. I repeated this to my therapist, and she pushed me to ask Not Me why. I asked, and Not Me replied with a giggle, because it's fun. I don't remember exactly how long this took or exactly what we did, but my therapist walked me through visualizing Not Me being swallowed up by the darkness, and then we brought in a bright white light until it erased all of the negativity in my space. I could tell my therapist was a bit shaken, and it felt like she was earnest in moving us through that cleansing process, and I did not leave lighter that day. The next morning, I was at work and texting my best friend. A bit about my best friend. I've known her since I took a breath on this planet. She was 4 months old, and her mother drove my mother to the hospital when she went into labor with me. We've known each other literally my entire life. She's my soul sister, and I tell her everything. We can always tell through some bond we have when the other is struggling, even if it's been weeks or months since we last spoke. We've traveled the world together. We're in our late 30s now, and she's a very successful logger in the northern area of our state and works specifically with the indigenous tribes there. I told her about how trippy my therapy session the day before was, and she texts me back, "Holy shit." I reply, "I know, right?" And she follows with, "No, you don't understand. Let me explain. I was in a meeting yesterday with the tribal elders at about the same time that you were having your session. At the end of that meeting, our medicine woman came up to me with a very serious look. She told me she had information to tell me that wasn't for me, but I would know who to give it to. She then explained that a dark entity had been connected to this person for many lifetimes and is actively trying to harm her, and that she needs to wear amber as a protective stone." I don't think I need to explain how absolutely shocking this was to hear and how floored both my bestie and I were. We live hundreds of miles apart from each other. How was all of this possible? I don't remember where the conversation went from there, but we were both shook. Anyway, I saw a different hypnotherapist shortly after that who gave me tools to guard and protect my innermost self from negative energy. I also now have a few pieces of amber jewelry, which I wear when I'm feeling vulnerable for whatever reason. Amber isn't my color, vibe, or usual stone, but I'm not wearing them for fashion. If anyone wants to know the tools the hypnotherapist gave me for protection, I would be happy to share them as well. I would love to know the tools. I am really glad that that elder knew exactly what you needed. So that's so scary. I can't imagine how scary that was for the therapist as well. Oof. All right, let's read another story. This happened shortly after we moved back to my home province in Canada, New Brunswick. It's East Coast and we are in the line of the Appalachian Mountains, I believe. I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the story, but fun little fact. It's a long one, as it didn't just happen to me, but also my sister and some friends in the house with us. I'd say this haunting lasted only 3 to 4 months and then stopped altogether. This was around the time that I was 14. My friends' ages were all close to that, and my sister was around 11. I had this one friend who was super into messing around with paranormal stuff. It was fun to her. So we would always make fake Ouija boards or something else creepy when we had sleepovers for fun, as we were just kids and didn't know any better. This one time, my friend, who also tended to exaggerate the truth during these games to scare us, asked if I wanted to try a new game. She basically explained that we would draw a pentagram on a piece of paper, put our blood on it, and then go to a different place in our heads. I didn't want to mess around with blood stuff, so I told her I'd supervise, but I wouldn't join in. So she does her thing, and I watch her, and everything seems to be going fine for a bit. Now, I should mention some things first before I continue. In my room, the light switch had a switch, but also had a remote to control the fan and the light. The light options did not have a dim option. The lights did not dim. And the remote was next to me the whole time. Part of this game, which I now know to be some weird ritual, I'm sure of it, was if the lights turned out, we had to get out of the room quickly or we would be open to some sort of door. So on with the story. She's maybe sitting there quietly with her eyes closed for 10 minutes and everything seemed fine. Then when she comes back, she's acting really weird, standoffish, quiet. At first I believed she was pulling my leg or trying to scare me. She didn't seem to be paying any attention to me and seemed focused. I thought she was lost in thought and asked her what was up. She said it sounded like she could hear voices behind her ears, but not in her head. Like someone was whispering behind her. Even though she was laying down on my bed, I told her to try and focus on what we're saying. She sits up, sits on the edge of the bed, and I'm sitting on the floor. She looks at me and says, 5 seconds? Like she's trying to make out the words. I still think she's pulling my leg until the lights dim dramatically, not fully shutting off. We run out of the room and the light bulb had burnt out. Now, it could be a coincidence, but well, weird timing, right? This is the first part of that story. What I think was the beginning of the hauntings. It's the only thing to me that really stands out. Although it was a horribly done ritual, no chanting or anything else, I think it could have started something. As this friend had already had the things attached to her, I believe. We did not know this at 14. I have 3 stories connected to this that I'll share. One from my sister, one where we had multiple of my friends experience it with us, and one from me, the last experience I had with the haunting, and the last event that seemed to end all of it after my experience. Here's story number 1. The story where me, my sister, and 2 of my friends were spending the night alone in my room as my mom was working. We were pretty chill kids, just hung out at home, didn't drink or party, so we were trusted. So I'll assign names at this point, so things don't get too confusing. My sister Mara, friend number 1, and the same friend from the ritual, Monica. Friend number 2, Britt. This was during the late evening time, shortly after dusk when it's a little darker than the sunset time. Monica and Mara were sitting downstairs playing games online, and me and Britt were upstairs hanging out on the balcony having a chat. I was using my phone for music and Britt was messaging someone on her iPad. We were all using technology at this time. Weirdly enough, but nothing too questionable, me and Britt's electronics started to malfunction. My decently charged phone was now dying, and Britt's messages not sending through or anything loading. We later find out Monica and Mara's laptops and the TV in the living room were also starting to malfunction. The Wi-Fi stopped working, cell service dropped, and the TV turned to static. Suddenly from upstairs, me and Britt hear Monica and Mara screaming. We had the balcony door open so we could hear, and then suddenly rushing up the stairs at us. We panicked, going to see what was happening, and they shut my door tightly and fast. They said they had heard someone knocking on the front door, but very, very loudly, which is strange because my balcony was above the door, and me and Britt both did not hear or see anyone approach. We tried to calm them down, thinking maybe the cat just knocked something heavy down, and they panicked and just ran out before considering anything, but they insisted it wasn't. While we bickered a bit back and forth, Britt shushes us. We all get quiet, and we hear what sounds like footsteps coming up the stairs towards my bedroom door, which was now closed. We all tense and hold on to each other. Luckily for me, I like doing crafts and had scissors upstairs, so we prepare for the worst, as much as kids should, because remember, our cell phones at this point were not working to call. Britt is the only one brave enough to go first, and I stand with her, making sure she's not completely alone. We open the door, and no one. Strange, but we all heard it. We suddenly think the worst again, that they might have just retreated back downstairs. So we slowly make our way down, and Monica checks repeatedly to make sure our phones are still not working. We head downstairs and check all of the doors. They're all locked, same for the windows. Nothing looked broken into. Everything seemed clear, and our phones start working again shortly after. My mom didn't believe us, but had my grandma come check the place anyways, and we didn't find anything. The second story, Mara's experience. So this one might be a bit shorter, as it was told to be by Mara a while ago. I'll try to recall it as much as I can, but by this point, Mara had a birthday and was 12, I believe. And so was her friend that she had over that we'll call Becca. They were home alone for a couple of hours one day hanging out. Our house was 3 stories at the time, and they enjoyed playing hide and seek together. I think they may have made it a bit more complex, but for the story, we'll just say hide and seek. It was Mara's turn to hide, and she decides to go hide in the basement, which was finished as my parents used it as their bedroom. It was bigger and they had more space, but there was an unfinished laundry room, which had a small and little hidden section. In the section further back, there was an older cabinet that was left behind or left there by the people we were renting from. We never really used it, but it didn't look creepy or dirty. We assumed that they used it to hold all their laundry supplies before we got there. Anyway, she decides to crouch down beside the cabinet so the side would hide her. The cabinet was against a wall, so she also had the wall to lean back against, and waited. After a bit, she started to hear scratching sounds coming from behind her head. Weird. She turned her ear to listen and heard faint scratching still. She took her finger and lightly tapped against the wall a couple of times, and it responded to her by tapping back. But not light taps, but slightly louder. Freaked her out, so she was just going to call it quits and let Becca have the win. She turned to leave, and when she did, she noticed the cabinet door now slightly ajar. The entire time we were there, that door never had an issue staying closed on its own. Before or after this experience, she slid out a little further, only for the door to the cabinet to swing fully open towards her. She did the smart thing though, and slammed it shut and ran out of there and back upstairs. I don't think she ever returned back down there after that. The third story, my story. So during the 3 to 4 months we had experienced things, I experienced my first time getting sleep paralysis. And during those 3 months, I experienced sleep paralysis probably 1 to 2 times a week until it was completely stopped. I've never experienced sleep paralysis since that time in my life, so this experience was almost the same every time, changed slightly each month. So the first bout of dreams, there was a shadowy figure standing in the corner of my room staring and watching me. The first month or so is mainly what it was, plus the dreadful feelings that come with sleep paralysis. Then it changed. One night suddenly to the figure now standing next to my bed, maybe half a foot from being able to touch me. Then after the month or so, this figure's now standing with a foot on each side of his hip, staring down at me. Standing over me. I felt so scared and panicked, and it was terrifying, but not as scary as the final dream I had. So to finish this off, this haunting experience, my last and final sleep paralysis, I'm not sure that's fully what it was at the end. So it starts with my lights flickering on and off, waking me up. I felt like I had woken up anyways. It all felt so real, like I was awake the whole time, but even though it felt real, I couldn't move. So my lights are flickering, my curtains to my balcony door are blowing wildly, as if I had left my doors open, but I hadn't. Things are now being thrown around my room. It was chaos. And then suddenly, I'm looking down at myself. I'm looking down at myself like I'm using someone else's eyes. I'm watching my blankets be thrown off of me. I'm watching my body suddenly be slid to the head of the bed and the middle of my back, which I believe is impossible to bend otherwise, bend right in half. I'm shaking, I'm straining, my eyes are rolled back. It looks like I can't breathe. I'm seeing all of this from a bird's eye view. It felt so real. Even though I was watching myself, I could feel it. I felt my back bending painfully, my lungs sore from what had felt like air being stolen. My bones so stiff. Suddenly it all goes black and I truly feel like I wake up. I run downstairs to find my mom, look at the stairs to my bedroom door and see it slam shut before I properly wake again. That was the last experience me, my sister, and any of my friends have ever had. I think that might have been one of the scariest stories that I have ever had sent to me. Like, I'm gonna save that and also tell it on TikTok because I have no words, only fear. Alright, let's get into the next story. I've been dealing with something watching me for years now. It started when I moved in with my aunt and took over her basement. It was dark, damp, and unfinished basement used for storage. I took a corner of it and hung blankets to section off my room for the rest of the basement. It's worth noting that there was a piano down there. After a while of living there, I started to get this feeling, like there was something that was peering around the blankets near my bed, near the piano, to watch me throughout the night. I felt I should mention that I have never seen or heard this thing ever, but it's like I can see it in my mind, exactly what it looks like, and I can feel when it's around. I started to get an image in my mind of this thing. Think of the rake, but bipedal and 7 to 8 feet tall. It had bright wide eyes and the creepiest smile on its face. I always see it in my mind when I'm alone or when I wake up at night. When I moved out, my friend, a pagan, came downstairs to help me carry some boxes and immediately told me the air felt heavy and that something did not want her there. It chilled me and made me start to think that this thing was real and not just a part of my active imagination. When I completed my move to Texas, I got an apartment with my boyfriend. This is a very small apartment, only 750 square feet. It was light and airy, and I didn't feel anything in there. I didn't feel his presence at all either, so it left my mind and I never thought about it much. We would have small house parties with my boyfriend's mom and her husband. It was shortly after the first month of us living there, and I started to feel this presence again. I began feeling very uneasy as I started to picture this thing residing in our doorless closet in the bedroom. I began to have a hard time sleeping again, and I would wake up multiple times in the night and immediately look at the closet, expecting it to be there. One day, my boyfriend's stepdad, Victor, called out of the blue and said, "I want to do a cleansing on your apartment." And my boyfriend said he's Mexican and it's common for them to cleanse homes for others. I don't know the culture very well, but I just shrugged and agreed to it. Victor came in and scooped out the house. He told us to take all of the wall hangings down to allow for the cleansing. I discreetly asked him to check that closet because I thought something was there, and he immediately pulled me to the side and asked me what I thought because he felt something bad in there. I told him what I saw in my mind, and he told me that he would do his best to get rid of it. He went through with all the cleansings and cleansed me too, leaving behind jars of some kind of herb mixture under our bed to cleanse for the rest of the way. He told me he would be back in the next week to get them and see if it worked. When he came back the next week, we found the jar under my boyfriend's side was just as it had been left, a normal greenish yellow. When Victor grabbed mine, it was pitch black and had the consistency of sludge. He was deeply unsettled but said it was gone now and I shouldn't have problems again. And I immediately felt lighter in this apartment. I slept very well for about a week, but then the nightmares started. I dreamt that I was in my aunt's basement and all of the storage was gone, leaving behind my original bed down there. Another bed on the other side of the basement and that piano. In the dream, my boyfriend and I were in the bed on the other side of the basement, and something else, I'm not sure what it was supposed to be because I never saw a face, was sleeping in my original bed. The piano would make noises every so often, and we knew it was haunted, but we ignored it and we went to bed. When we woke up, the person sleeping on my bed had been unalived, and there was blood everywhere. I would wake up with a terrified cry, and I could hardly sleep the rest of the night. I would have this dream every night for nearly 2 weeks straight. It felt like a threat of some sort. Now, upon writing this, I've started feeling this thing again. I've yet to see it, but I can see it as clear as day in my mind's eye. I feel deeply unnerved by this thing, and I look constantly to the closet expecting to see it there staring at me. I've brought evil eye bracelets here to help, but I feel like it's still here. I don't know what else to do now. I'm terrified I'll start actually seeing it. I'm also scared to do another cleansing because I don't have those terrifying dreams anymore. I would like to provide an update as things have escalated. I'd like to start by clarifying that the first half of the story took place in Wisconsin, as I neglected to mention that. Now, things have definitely gotten worse. As someone who believes in spirits but has never heard anything weird, I've been freaking out for a few months now. I'll start from the most recent beginning. Many mornings I've gotten up to find our Kleenex box, usually on my boyfriend's desk in the middle of the living room. It's on the floor in the mouth of the hallway. At first I assumed this was because we forgot to turn the fan off and maybe that was just blowing it over there, but it's quite some distance away. Even when I didn't leave the fan on, the box is there most mornings. I've noticed I don't feel, hear, or see as much on days that the Kleenex box isn't moved. Adding on to that, my boyfriend started playing pool Wednesday nights and cards on Friday nights, so I'm totally alone in the apartment until midnight on those nights. About 2 weeks ago on Wednesday, I heard my boyfriend call Babe softly from the bedroom. Now, my apartment is small. It's literally 750 square feet, which is a living room, 1 bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a tiny kitchen. There's absolutely no way I didn't notice him come home. That night, I was playing games on my computer, and I was quietly listening to lo-fi when I heard it. My whole body went tingly, and I immediately felt terrified. I knew it wasn't him. I learned from you not to acknowledge it, so I kept quiet and continued playing my game, though I wasn't really into it anymore. And sure enough, he came home at midnight and denied ever being home before that. I've started seeing shadow figures, which I used to see a lot as a kid but haven't recently. I've started having that dream again from the basement, and I've heard my boyfriend calling me from the living room in the middle of the night when he's asleep. My boyfriend thinks I'm creeping myself out and not actually hearing these things, but I definitely am. I'm also hearing whispering at night too, which wakes me up. I'm barely sleeping now and I'm truly exhausted and living on caffeine. I've tried staying quiet about it, even sitting outside more when my boyfriend is at home, just to get away from it. I don't want to acknowledge it, nor do I want people to think I'm crazy. I'm not sure what to do because I'm not super religious, but I do believe the earth takes care of those who take care of it. I think our past cleansings didn't work because I didn't fully believe in the religion. I'm new to religion, and I like the idea of paganism and would definitely be open to trying that too. Not pertaining to what I'm currently talking about, but my brother back in Wisconsin found this old Ouija board that was in my childhood room, which I never touched and played it alone. He said it spelled my name 3 times, said goodbye, and now he can't get it to say anything else, so that's terrifying. My childhood was filled with paranormal activity, and I have tons more long stories if you're interested. I'm always interested in more stories. So here's the thing when it comes to cleansings, protection jars, and things like that. They don't work as well if you don't fully believe it. You have to give over your energy to make it work, if that makes sense. If you're open to paganism, I would definitely look into maybe trying some cleansings yourself. I literally light an incense of either lavender, rosemary, or dragon's blood, and I take it around my house, hit each 4 corners of the room while I envision bad energy leaving and telling bad energy that it can't stay there. I always make sure to have a window open because I feel like if I don't, the energy won't go anywhere. It'll just kind of move around the house. So I leave that open, and then after, I immediately do something that makes me happy. I fill the space up with joy and happiness, and I think that's the same thing, but fill the space up with light so that there's no room for the dark, if that makes sense. As far as that entity goes, it seems like it has been attached to you for a really long time. That's what I'm feeling, especially with that Ouija board. I think a cord cutting ritual is something that you should maybe look into. Those are pretty successful for things like that. It's not really talked about how you can use cord cutting rituals for different things. Mostly people just use them on other people, but you can use those for negative emotions, for entities, for anything, bad habits. You can really utilize those rituals. So if you're open to that stuff, I would definitely look into it, because I think that would be beneficial. But ignoring it, you're doing really well. Keep trying to do that. Don't really talk about it out loud. As scary as this is going to sound, I don't think the apartment's haunted. I think you're haunted. So, I mean, even if you did talk about it in there, I don't really think it's going to do more harm than you just talking about it down the street at a coffee shop. So, I would look into cleansings and cord cutting rituals for sure. And yes, please tell me your other stories and keep me updated on this. So, I know I only read 3 stories, but they were on the longer side. So, I think I'm going to call it today. Those stories were very intense. So, I feel like we could all use a little bit of a break. And I will see you soon.